The night was colder than she expected. A sharp wind swept through the empty streets of Los Angeles as Kesha Williams stood on the marble driveway of a mansion that wasn't hers. She clutched a worn suitcase in one hand, the other resting on her belly where a child was growing, a child she had sworn to protect. Behind her, the heavy iron gates closed with a final thud. "Don't ever come back," Richard Hale's voice echoed from the porch. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The calm cruelty in his tone cut deeper than any scream. Only moments earlier, Kesha had begged him not to turn his back on her. She wasn't asking for money, not for marriage, not even for love. Just acknowledgement, just responsibility. But Richard, a powerful businessman with a perfect smile and polished shoes, had shaken his head like she was a problem to be erased. To him, reputation mattered more than people. His empire, his image, the parties with senators and bankers, that was the world he chose. And Keisha, the housekeeper from Compton who had fallen for him, was now nothing but a secret he wanted buried. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let him see her break. Instead, she whispered, "One day, you'll regret this." It was not anger that carried those words, it was a quiet promise. The Uber she ordered with her last $20 pulled up to the curb. The driver glanced at her, then at the mansion towering behind and back at her again. Keisha slid into the back seat, holding her stomach as if to shield her child from the bitter air. The car rolled away from Beverly Hills, leaving the glitter of wealth behind. Through the window, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold. Keisha made a vow, not to Richard, not even to herself, but to the little life inside her. No matter how hard it would be, she would raise this child with dignity. She would prove that being discarded did not mean being destroyed. And as the car disappeared into the night, she didn't know yet that this ending, the cruel shove out of someone else's world, was also the beginning of a story far greater than either of them could imagine. The car dropped her off in a quiet part of the city, far from the manicured lawns of Beverly Hills. Kesha climbed the narrow staircase of a small apartment complex, the kind with peeling paint and dim hallways that smelled faintly of old cooking oil. It wasn't home, not yet, but it was shelter, and for now, that was enough. Life in the months that followed was harder than anything she could have imagined. The pregnancy drained her strength, and the bills piled up faster than she could keep track. She took a part-time job cleaning offices in the evenings, walking slowly with her growing belly, pushing through fatigue because she had no choice. The rent had to be paid, the lights had to stay on. When the contractions came on a rainy morning, Keisha found herself in the crowded waiting room of a public hospital. No private room, no luxury. Just a thin curtain separating her from other women who were also bringing life into the world. She gritted her teeth through the pain, clutching the thin bedsheet, telling herself over and over, "This child is not a mistake. He's a blessing. He's my chance to change everything." Hours later, when they placed the newborn boy in her arms, her exhaustion melted into something greater. His tiny fingers curled around hers, fragile yet determined. She named him David. The weeks after his birth were a blur of sleepless nights and long days. Kesha learned how to stretch a single paycheck across food, rent, and diapers. She learned how to study in the quiet hours while David slept. Textbooks balanced on her lap and a cup of cheap coffee keeping her awake. It would have been easy to give in to bitterness, to curse Richard for what he had done, but Kesha refused. Anger wasn't going to feed her son, determination would. Neighbours sometimes shook their heads, whispering about the young mother with no husband, no support. But she kept her chin up. Every time she looked at David, she saw not a reminder of betrayal, but the reason she couldn't quit. On nights when the city lights flickered outside her window and she rocked her baby to sleep, she whispered promises into the dark. "I'll give you the life I never had. You won't grow up feeling unwanted. You'll know you belong. You'll know you matter." And though her world was small, just a tiny apartment and a child cradled against her chest, something powerful was beginning to grow inside her. The kind of resolve that would shape not only her future, but David's as well. Time passed in quiet, determined steps. The crib that once sat in the corner of the apartment gave way to a small bed, and the baby who had clung to her shirt now ran through the narrow hallways with sneakers that always seemed too worn for how fast he grew. David was full of questions, always tugging at his mother's hand, always looking for answers in her tired eyes. Kesha worked long hours, sometimes leaving before sunrise and returning after dark, but she never let her son feel abandoned. She would come home, drop her bag on the couch, and sit cross-legged on the floor with him, helping him piece together puzzles or reading aloud from borrowed library books. No matter how heavy the day had been, she poured every ounce of herself into those moments. At school, David stood out, not for the clothes he wore, those were often hand-me-downs, but for the way he carried himself. Teachers noticed his focus, his hunger to learn. Classmates teased him for not having a father at home, but David always came back with a quiet strength that surprised them. "I don't need a father to tell me who I am," he once told a boy on the playground. "My mum already taught me that." There were nights when Kesha broke down behind closed doors. The bills spread across the kitchen table, her head in her hands, but she never let David see her tears. To him, she was unshakable. She was the person who held the world together, who turned scarcity into stability, who made a single meal stretch into something warm and filling. One evening, after a long day at work and an even longer day of studying for her classes, Kesha sat with David on the apartment balcony. The city hummed below them, neon signs flickering against the night sky. He leaned against her shoulder, his voice soft but certain. "Mum, when I grow up, I'm going to make sure you never have to work this hard again." Her eyes filled, but she only kissed the top of his head and smiled. "Just promise me one thing, David. Work hard, but never lose your kindness. Success without kindness isn't really success at all." David didn't fully understand those words yet, but they settled deep inside him, the way seeds settle into soil, waiting for their time to grow. And in that cramped apartment, with laughter mixing in with the sound of traffic outside, a dream was quietly taking root. A dream that would one day carry him far beyond anything either of them could yet imagine. The years of childhood faded into the restless energy of teenage life. David was taller now, his voice deeper, but his heart still carried the same quiet determination that had always set him apart. While other boys bragged about sneakers or weekend parties, David carried a backpack heavy with books, walking home each afternoon to the small apartment where his mother waited with a tired smile. Kesha's life had not grown easier, but it had grown steadier. She had finished her degree slowly and painfully by taking night classes and balancing them against the demands of work and motherhood. Now she worked as an assistant in a small accounting firm, not glamorous by any stretch, but it gave her just enough to pay the rent on time and keep food on the table. David saw it all. He saw the way she rubbed her temples after long hours of staring at numbers on a screen. He noticed the way she skipped meals when groceries ran short. And though she tried to shield him, he caught her late at night with textbooks spread across the kitchen table, eyes drooping but refusing to quit. At school, his teachers recognized his talent. "You could go anywhere," one of them told him after class. "College scholarships, if you keep working like this, the sky isn't even the limit." Those words lit something in him, but he never let himself forget why he was working so hard. Every grade, every late-night study session, every test was more than just about his future. It was about his mother's sacrifices, about proving that all her sleepless nights had meant something. The day his acceptance letter arrived, the envelope stamped with the name of a university he had only dreamed of attending, David ran up the stairs 2 at a time. Kesha was at the stove stirring a pot of soup when he burst in waving the letter. "Mom, I got in!" She dropped the spoon and pulled him into her arms, holding him so tight he could barely breathe. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "I told you, David, hard work always pays off. I knew you could do this." That evening, they sat together on the balcony again, the same place where years before he had promised to take care of her. The city lights blinked below, and the future stretched out like an open road. For the first time, Kesha allowed herself to imagine a life beyond survival. David, leaning back in his chair, said softly, "This is just the beginning, Mom. I'm going to make sure you never have to worry again." She smiled through her tears, brushing his hair back like she did when he was a boy. "Just remember what I told you," she said. "Success is nothing without kindness." Those words would follow him into lecture halls, late-night study groups, and every decision he made in the years to come. And though neither of them could see it yet, the path they were on was slowly, inevitably, winding back toward the man who had once cast them aside. College opened a world that David had only seen in brochures and movies. The campus stretched wide with old brick buildings and leafy quads, and the students around him carried themselves with a confidence born from privilege. Many arrived in cars their parents had gifted them, talking casually about vacations in Europe or summer internships already secured through family connections. David carried no such advantages. He walked across campus in thrift store clothes, textbooks rented instead of bought, juggling part-time jobs in the library and dining hall to cover what the scholarship didn't. Yet none of it dimmed his drive. Each morning he woke with the same thought: don't waste this chance, it's not just mine, it's Mom's too. The distance from home weighed on him most at night. There were evenings when he sat alone in the dorm, staring at the ceiling, missing the sound of his mother humming in the kitchen. On harder days, when exams stacked up and exhaustion blurred his vision, he would call her. Her voice always steadied him. "David, I'm proud of you already. Remember, it's not about being the best, it's about doing your best, that's enough." Her words became a compass. Slowly, David found his footing. Professors noticed his sharp mind and his ability to see solutions others overlooked. Friends sought him out for advice. He wasn't just keeping up, he was thriving. One summer, instead of going back home, David secured an internship at an investment firm in the city. The office was nothing glamorous, just rows of cubicles and humming printers, but for him, it felt like stepping into another universe. He listened closely, took notes, asked questions no one else bothered to ask. His supervisors began to notice, and doors opened that usually stayed closed for someone with no connections. When he finally graduated, Kesha was there in the front row of the ceremony. She wore a simple dress and clutched the program like it was made of gold. As David walked across the stage to receive his diploma, he scanned the crowd until his eyes found hers. She was crying, not quietly, but with the raw pride of someone who knew every ounce of this achievement had been carved out of sacrifice. After the ceremony, he wrapped his arms around her. "We did it, Mom," he whispered. She held him tightly. "No, David, you did it. You made everything I went through worth it." The two of them stood there, mother and son against the world, unaware that far across the city, in glass towers where fortunes were made and lost, Richard Hale was beginning to face cracks in the empire he had built. And those cracks would soon bring their lives colliding again. The first years after graduation tested David in new ways. He stepped into the working world with nothing but his degree, a handful of recommendations, and the determination his mother had instilled in him. The city was unforgiving, filled with glass towers that reached for the sky, and people who seemed to live only for their next deal. David started at the bottom, running reports, making late-night edits, and staying in the office long after most had gone home. He didn't complain. Each long day reminded him of the nights he had watched his mother studying at the kitchen table, refusing to quit, no matter how tired she was. Her resilience became his habit. Slowly, his efforts drew attention. He had a way of seeing numbers, not just as figures on a page, but as stories, patterns of greed, missed chances, and hidden opportunities. Senior partners who barely noticed interns began calling on him in meetings. What set him apart wasn't just his skill, it was the quiet confidence that came from years of proving himself without shortcuts. Meanwhile, across the city, Richard Hale's empire was faltering. The real estate market had shifted, and risky investments piled up. Rumours of corruption swirled through boardrooms and news outlets, though Richard always found a way to smile through interviews, brushing problems aside. To the world, he was still the powerful businessman, but behind closed doors, cracks spread deeper each day. David knew none of this yet. He was too busy climbing his own path. But fate has a way of weaving lives together. One autumn afternoon, he was asked to join a new project. evaluating the financial health of several struggling companies in Los Angeles. It was an opportunity far above his pay grade, one that could shape the course of his career. He called his mother that night. "They're trusting me with something big, Mom," he said, pacing his small apartment. Her voice on the other end was steady, warm. "You earned it, David. Just remember, do it with integrity. Don't let the world change who you are." He promised her he wouldn't. What neither of them knew was that this project would soon bring him face to face with the man who had once turned them away. The past, long buried, was beginning to stir. The file landed on David's desk, thick with numbers and contracts. Across the cover in bold letters was the name Hale Properties. At first it was just another case, another struggling firm looking for a lifeline. But the more he flipped through the pages, the stranger it felt. The numbers told a story of a company built on sand, loans hidden behind shell companies, payments routed through strange channels, properties valued far above what they were worth. Late nights found him bent over his desk, connecting dots no one else bothered to see. Each discovery added weight to the silence of the office. Whoever ran this company wasn't just careless, they were arrogant, convinced no one would ever notice. During a team meeting, one of the senior partners mentioned casually, "Richard Hale used to be untouchable in this town, but the rumours about him, they've been circling for years." The name caught in David's mind like a hook. Hale. He repeated it silently, as if the sound itself stirred something half buried. That evening, back at his mother's apartment, he brought it up over dinner. The same kitchen table where she once studied at night was now the place where he shared the details of his work. "We're reviewing a real estate firm," he said, "Hale Properties." For a moment, Kesha's hand froze above her plate. She lowered her fork slowly, her expression shifting almost imperceptibly. To anyone else, it would have passed unnoticed. But David had grown up watching her face, learning to read the slightest flicker of emotion. "You know the name?" he asked. She drew in a breath, steadying herself. "I've heard it before." Her voice was calm, but her eyes told a different story, a shadow of a memory she wasn't ready to bring into the open. She reached for her glass, taking a slow sip, then changed the subject. David let it go, but later that night, lying in bed, he replayed the moment, the pause, the look in her eyes. It wasn't recognition alone, it was pain, carefully folded away and left untouched for years. Back at the office, the deeper he dug, the more uneasy he became. The reports weren't just numbers anymore, they felt personal, though he couldn't explain why. And behind the name on those pages was a man he hadn't met yet, a man whose choices had once changed the course of his life without him even knowing. The path was narrowing, drawing him toward a truth he could almost sense but couldn't yet see. The meeting was set in a high-rise conference room with walls of glass overlooking downtown Los Angeles. David straightened his tie, though his nerves weren't about fashion. He had presented to powerful people before, but something about this one felt heavier, as if the pages in his briefcase carried more than numbers. The door opened, and in walked Richard Hale. His hair had thinned, streaked with grey, but he still carried himself with the self-assurance of a man used to being obeyed. He extended his hand to the room, shaking with quick, firm grips, smiling the kind of smile polished by years of cocktail parties and magazine covers. When his eyes landed on David, the smile faltered. Just for a moment, David noticed it. Something in the older man's expression shifted, as though a shadow passed behind his gaze. Richard quickly recovered, lowering himself into the chair across the table. David began his presentation, pointing out the company's debts, its questionable loans, the trail of money that didn't match its public reports. His voice was steady, professional, but beneath the calm delivery, his chest tightened. Because as he spoke, he couldn't shake the strange pull of recognition. The tilt of Richard's chin, the cadence of his voice. It was like looking at a distorted mirror. Richard too seemed unsettled. He shifted in his seat, interrupting occasionally with sharp questions meant to test David. But there was an edge in his tone that wasn't just business. It was personal, though neither said so. At one point, Richard leaned forward. "Williams, is it? That's your last name?" David nodded. "Yes, Williams." The way he said it was deliberate, steady. Richard's lips pressed together. He glanced at the papers in front of him but didn't read them. His mind was elsewhere, digging back through years he had tried to bury. When the meeting ended, the others filed out, but Richard lingered, watching David pack his notes. "You look familiar," he said, his voice quieter now. "Have we met before?" David looked up, meeting his eyes. For a long moment neither spoke. Finally David answered simply, "No, but you've met my mother." He didn't wait for Richard's reply. He gathered his things, walked out of the room, and left the older man staring after him with a face drained of colour. That night Richard sat alone in his office, pulling open old files, old memories he had tried to erase. And there, in the corners of his mind, the truth he had denied for decades began to rise to the surface. The boy across the table wasn't just another analyst. He was the ghost of a choice Richard had made long ago, standing now in flesh and blood, stronger than he ever imagined. The next meeting was different. David walked into the room with a calm resolve, but this time he wasn't alone. Kesha was beside him, dressed in a simple navy suit, her hair pulled back neatly, her presence steady and unshaken. Years had given her strength, not bitterness, and when she entered, the air shifted. Richard rose from his chair as if pulled by some invisible force, his face drained of colour. "Kesha," he whispered, as though saying her name dragged ghosts into the daylight. She didn't flinch. "It's been a long time, Richard." David set a folder on the table, sliding it forward. Inside were documents, evidence of the very things his team had uncovered. Misused funds, forged reports, backroom deals. The papers spoke louder than words. But it wasn't the numbers that cut Richard down. It was the sight of the woman and son standing together, unbroken. Richard tried to summon the charm that had carried him through decades of scandals. "Look, we were young, mistakes were made, I can make this right, money, positions, whatever you want." "Stop," David interrupted, his voice sharp enough to silence the room. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from a lifetime of emotions finally rising to the surface. "You don't get to buy your way out of what you did. You threw us away like we didn't matter. You left my mother in the cold, pregnant and alone. And now you think you can write a cheque and call it even?" Richard's mouth opened, but no words came. Kesha stepped closer, her eyes steady on him. "I don't want your money, Richard. I never did. All I ever wanted was for you to take responsibility for the life you helped create, but you couldn't even give him your name." David turned toward her, his chest heavy with both anger and pride. Hearing her say those words out loud felt like the closing of a wound that had never truly healed. Richard's voice cracked, desperation creeping in. "David, you're my son." David shook his head slowly. "No, you lost the right to call me that the day you turned your back on us. A father is someone who shows up. A father is someone who sacrifices. The only parent I've ever had is standing right here." He gestured toward Kesha, who stood tall, her eyes glistening with quiet pride. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting match could have been. Richard lowered himself back into his chair, shoulders sagging under the weight of regret. For the first time, the man who once seemed untouchable looked small. Kesha placed her hand gently on her son's arm. "Come on, David," she said softly. We've said what needed to be said." Together, they walked out, leaving Richard alone with the truth he had tried to bury for so many years. The empire he built was crumbling, and now so was the lie he had lived. The downfall of Richard Hale played out not in whispers but in headlines. His company, once praised as a pillar of wealth and influence, collapsed under the weight of investigations. Lawsuits stacked higher than the towers he built, and the man who once seemed untouchable became a public cautionary tale. David didn't follow every article. He didn't need to. For him, the real victory was not in Richard's fall, but in knowing that he and his mother had risen without him. One evening he stopped by his mother's home. The apartment was brighter now, filled with signs of a life built with dignity. Kesha sat near the window with a mug of tea, the city lights flickering across her face. She looked peaceful in a way David hadn't seen in years. "You know," she said softly, "I used to think the only way to heal would be to see him lose everything. But now that it's happened, I don't feel joy, I just feel free." David nodded, taking a seat beside her. We didn't need him to fall for us to stand. We were already building something better. Her hand reached across the table, resting on his. And we built it the right way, without lies, without crushing others, without forgetting who we are. In the months that followed, David put his energy into more than just his career. He launched a foundation in his mother's name, offering scholarships to kids from neighbourhoods like the one she had grown up in. He wanted young people who carried heavy odds stacked against them to feel what he once felt, that someone believed in them. At the first scholarship dinner, Kesha stood on stage beside him. The room was filled with students, parents and teachers. David spoke with steady conviction, not hiding his story, but embracing it. I am standing here because one person refused to give up on me. Everything I've achieved is because of her strength. My mother is the reason I believe in a better future for all of us. Applause filled the room. Kesha wiped her eyes, overwhelmed not by the spotlight, but by the truth in her son's words. Far away, Richard Hale sat alone, writing letters that went unanswered. He had lost the business, the fortune, and the reputation he once guarded so fiercely. But the deeper loss was something he could never buy back, the chance to be part of the family he had thrown away. For Kesha and David, there was no need to look back. Their story wasn't about revenge, it was about proving that love, sacrifice, and integrity could outlast cruelty and greed. As they left the stage that night, mother and son side by side, it was clear their legacy wasn't the pain they had endured, but the hope they had created. The true measure of success isn't revenge or wealth, but the ability to rise above cruelty and build something better. Love, integrity, and perseverance can turn pain into a legacy of hope. Thank you so much for staying with us until the very end of this story. I'm truly grateful for your time. If you enjoyed it, please give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe to support the channel. I'll see you again in the next story here on Rain Inside.